We have a judging panel of 7 today. Starting from left, we have Joshua Park from Korea, then Patricia from Mexico, Navesh from Pakistan, I'm Duncan from New Zealand, then Charlie from England, Richard from Bermuda, and Bernie from Singapore. The 2 teams that made the quarterfinals today are Australia onside proposition and South Africa onside opposition. The motion for the House is that this House believes social movements in democratic countries to drive change through the courts rather than the elected legislature. Without any further ado, I invite the first leader of Australia to open the case.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's look at what courts have given social movements in the past. In the 1950s, they gave us Brown versus Board of Education, which desegregated schools and gave momentum to the civil rights movement. In 1973, they gave us Roe versus Wade, which was a crucial element of allowing women's rights to choose to have an abortion. Both of these decisions couldn't have been made nearly as effectively by elected legislature, which is held up by undue majoritarianism. In fact, what has elected legislature given us? In 1996, it gave us DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, which has consistently limited the ability of gay people to be recognised as having married. And what we're going to tell you today on side proposition is that because courts aren't inflicted by undue majoritarianism, because they're much more accessible for social rights movements that often don't consist of a very large number of people but still deserve equality, courts are going to be a more efficient mechanism and a more effective mechanism for pursuing change. And that's our test in today's debate, ladies and gentlemen. We're saying that it's more efficient and that it's more effective for social movements to pursue change through courts rather than elected legislature. We're not saying that elected legislature can never implement change. What we are saying, though, no thank you, is that insofar as there are limitations of resources available to these social movements, they'd be much better put into courts and systems of courts rather than elected legislature. The sort of courts that we're talking about are obviously mostly Supreme Courts at a state and federal level, and the social movements that we think are relevant to today's debate is in the modern world, particularly the gay rights movement, and in the past, I think we've seen relevant examples such as the civil rights movement and the women's movement. So I'm going to bring you 2 points in today's speech. Firstly, white courts aren't bound by undue majoritarianism, and secondly, white courts secure a much better pace of social change. On this first issue, about why undue majoritarianism limits the ability of social groups to pursue change. So obviously, the legislature is very influenced by the will of the majority, because in order to be elected and then re-elected in the future, they need to secure a majority of the votes. And that means they're always going to be influenced by exactly what the majority wants. But that's going to be problematic in the world. So firstly, that's because sometimes the majority is simply wrong. They absorb the prejudices of people. We saw that in the 1950s under Brown versus Board of Education. We've seen it in the past. That's why in the 90s, both Clinton and Bush advocated strongly for family values in a time when the gay rights movement didn't have as much power, because they were pandering to the majority, ladies and gentlemen. We say even if that's democratic, ladies and gentlemen, no thank you, it's still bad, because really what democracy stands for is equality for everyone, ladies and gentlemen, and the effects of the majority were actively impinging upon the rights of the minority to have proper rights. And we say that the rights of minorities shouldn't be at the discretion of the majority. That's part of the point of democracy. It's part of your ability to live in the world and be free. But further, we say that democracy has actively failed these rights groups in a number of cases, because even where there's actually majority support for different movements and for these groups, and I'll take you in a second, you still don't get the change. That's why in America there's more than 50% support for gay marriage, yet you still don't see it being enacted by legislature.
Considering this motion's in functional democracies, all of your examples have been in places where the countries haven't reached this stage of being a complete democracy and giving these...
Yeah, you're right, of course. America in the 1950s, after how many years of democracy was it? 170, hadn't reached a functional democracy, ladies and gentlemen. That's one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. But the point that I'm trying to make is that even now, democracy is still failing, ladies and gentlemen. I just gave you gay marriage. Do you think that America is not a functional democracy? Ladies and gentlemen, do you think that this debate exists anywhere in the world? That's insane. Okay, back to this. We think that democracy means that because people have preference things differently, it means that you can't get that sort of change. So even though people in America believe that gay marriage is a good thing, because it's not the most important thing on which they vote, you don't enact that sort of change, because in an election you might be voting more on economic policy than on gay rights. But when you see a decision in a court, you're only making a decision based on gay rights. You're only making a decision based on that one single issue, and it means you can get change much more efficiently. And so there's levels of interest that are particularly important. We also think it often doesn't benefit political parties to enact specific sorts of change. So the Democrats probably know that in the vast majority of cases they're going to get most of the votes from gay people in America. So they don't see a lot of benefit in creating policy that helps gay people in America, but they do see a benefit in not doing it because they would lose votes if they did create a policy that was unpopular among people who were homophobic. So there's no incentive for them to create change. Compare this to the courts, where the courts are always looking for the most systematic equality, where the Constitution of America says you need to guarantee every single person equality. That's what you see under our scenario. We also think that the media shifts the policy of the elected legislatures. So under climate change, for instance, this obviously isn't a social movement, I'm just using it as an example, you see that far more scientists believe in climate change than what the media would project. And that means that the elected legislature doesn't have the ability or the power to create the change. And we see similar things can happen with social movements. Because the media constantly predicts a balance where it doesn't exist, like in the example of gay marriage, it means you don't see the sort of change that you want to, and it means that democracy is not being imposed as effectively as we would like it to be. On to the second issue about why courts secure a much better case of social change. And we have a question for the opposition when we pose this question. How much longer would they have liked women to wait for Roe versus Wade in a world where that doesn't exist? How much longer would they want to force women to have babies when it was going to be bad for them? Sure.
Okay, well, these women, a lot of the time in democracies around the world, are being denied this because of the people within the courts not giving it to them as well.
But in America, we saw Roe versus Wade. In America, the courts have already been very efficient under this system, and we think that's a clear example of where courts have been successful. And we'd say that in a lot of cases, it's very difficult to get vast public support that you need to succeed in an elected legislature, but it's not nearly as difficult within a system of courts. Only 3% of people in America identify as gay, ladies and gentlemen, but that does not mean that gay people do not deserve rights. Ladies and gentlemen, they can get it under a system of courts because courts recognise that every single person deserves equality. We think that's a good thing. We think there are people on the United States Supreme Court, like Kagan, like Breyer, who, no thank you, are going to guarantee these people rights under these systems. Okay. We think, secondly, that these courts are much more accessible than legislature, because lobbying costs a lot of money within a system of legislature. It's much easier to do it with courts when you're dealing with fewer people. We also think that under legislature you need to have some sort of leverage, and often these groups don't have leverage. In the 50s, the Black Rights Group did not have leverage in a system of elected legislature, no thank you, but they could get it in a system of courts which recognised under the Constitution that every single person in that country was supposed to be recognised as equal. We've seen this happen in Australia, ladies and gentlemen. The Margaret Court decision in Australia was a decision that allowed Aboriginal people who had their land effectively stolen by colonials from America to get their land back if it was Crown land. That was a very unpopular decision within the will of the people, but in the eyes of the court, ladies and gentlemen, it was the right thing to do because those people deserved that land back. That was a decision that could only have been made by the courts. We think it's easy to get lawyers under a system of courts because often lawyers are willing to work for social movements under a system of pro bono. That's a very efficient way of getting these lawyers. And we also think that judges have an incentive to do the right thing because they know they're going to be viewed by history, and that means they want to do the right thing so that in the future they are perceived as having done the right thing. They're going to be judged by their peers if they do something that's seen as being unequal, and that means that judges are going to get better results. Also, they have tenure, which means they don't have to be re-elected, and therefore creating populist policy, but they can actively create policy which is good. So for all of these reasons, courts are much better at creating equality, and that's why we're proud to propose.
Thank you very much. I now welcome the first speaker of Team's Provision to open the case.
In a democracy, change needs to come from the people. If the people agree with your platform, then democratic change is easy. If the people don't agree with your platform, then you have to convince them to. We think as side opposition that simply bypassing the people in a democracy is a grave mistake. And that's why the team line we'll be bringing you today is that running to the courts may get you a judgment, but it won't get you legitimate or effective change. That's what we will be proposing in this debate. So we think that the clash is twofold here, and we'd like to add a third criteria to what they've offered to us today. Because on the first place, we do need to clash on what is the most effective way to achieve social change. But there's an additional burden on proposition, which is to show that we get acceptable or legitimate change in this case. Because we don't think that all social change is just good by virtue of it being a social movement. So they need to show us that they have a safeguard against change that goes against the people or that wouldn't be good for society. Our case split then will be as follows. Firstly, I'll be dealing with what is effective change, and then going on to dealing with how we achieve this by looking at a comparison between using the courts and using both or going to the elected legislature. No thanks. My second speaker, Colin, will then be arguing that, assuming but not conceding the courts were an effective way to get change, that this kind of change isn't always a good thing, and he'll be using that strategic line in his speech. Before I get on to my substantive though, let me deal with some fluff. And the first thing I'd like to attack is their examples, which we think are disingenuous in this debate. The first example they gave us was the case of Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka. And they argued that this is a perfect example of where running to the courts worked for people. Well, we think it didn't. We think that what happened there was that you got a ruling from the Supreme Court in the favor of the ACLU. But then you got the very next week, you had black children in Little Rock, Arkansas, being pursued by a mob of 3,000 angry white Southern Americans who were preventing them from entering the school that the court had ruled they needed to be allowed to. The National Guard had to be released to this area just because where the ACLU got a court change, they hadn't achieved an attitudinal change. That's a perfect example for our case of why the courts are not necessarily the best way to go. In terms of Roe versus Wade, yes, you got that decision, but you still have mobs of people outside Planned Parenthood stopping women from getting abortion. They haven't achieved that kind of deep change. It's a superficial change, but it's restricted to the courts, and we don't think that's good enough. Then we have to look at their argument about how majoritarianism limits change. And the first contention we bring is that we think the majority is important, for two reasons. Firstly, because in a democracy, the will of the people is something that we respect. We don't think that the line that, well, the majority is sometimes wrong, is enough to say the majority is always wrong. I think in many cases, they're right and we need to respect that. But moreover, even if there is an objective right thing and the majority is not going with that, we think in that case the majority is still important. Why? Because if you want to achieve deep or meaningful change, you have to convince the majority that you're right. Because if you don't, if you just have a court judgment, but you don't have the majority in a democracy on your side, you'll still get harms to the people you represent. And that's not real change. That's not what we should be arguing for in this debate. Can we get legislative change then? Yes. Look at the civil rights movement. They didn't win civil rights in America because they went to the Supreme Court. They won because of a sustained campaign, a popular campaign, to achieve political and legislative change. The 1964 and 68 Civil Rights Act. Lyndon Johnson was the man who brought rights to black Americans. It wasn't the Supreme Court of America. If they had stopped at the Supreme Court of America, we wouldn't have an African American president today. I can assure you of that, Australia. So we think that what we've got from side proposition today is a case that is restricted to very superficial change. And they prove that they can get the superficial change. We just don't think that that's enough. And that's what I'll be proving here in my first argument. Yes?
Do you think the women of America would prefer to sometimes have to confront anti-abortion protesters outside an abortion clinic, or not have the right to an abortion at all?
We think that the women of America would rather have legislation from their Senate, from their democratically elected senators, which allows them to undergo undergo an abortion, but which was achieved in such a way that assures that they don't have people mobbing them when they do that. We think you need both things. You can't just prove that you get one. And I'll be showing you why you get both in this first point. What is effective change? So we think that you need two things, which I've pretty much established already, if you want effective change. First of all, you need legislative change, or in this debate, judicial change, laws protecting or limiting rights. But moreover, you need attitudinal change, perceptive change, a societal rationalization that allows you to exist in society without being discriminated against. We think you need both of these for a social movement to achieve its aim. If you only get legislative or judicial, if you only have Roe v. Wade, we think there are still harms on the ground. We look at, for example, if a court in Uganda ruled in favor of gay rights, would homosexuals in Uganda still be discriminated against? Would they still be stoned? Yes, we think that would still happen because you haven't achieved any attitudinal change. We think that, moreover, if attitudinal change does happen, the harms to a minority are immediately mitigated and legislation follows afterwards. We look at the civil rights movement. We look at the fact that they had a sustainable campaign, and they eventually got legislative change because of that. We argue that running to the courts doesn't get this comprehensive change because it only achieves the first of the two very important things that you need to. No, thank you. So how do we get both of these? How do we get effective change? And we will argue that you only get this deep change through elected legislation. So the proposition defaults to the courts, they default to legal action. We would point out a few problems with running to the courts that they need to deal with in their next speech. First of all, going to the courts is slow. The judicial process is a lengthy one and it's a costly one. You're up against a state with bottomless resources and you have to often